The story of the 1882 United States half-dollar pattern coin begins in a fascinating period of American monetary history when the nation was still adjusting to the economic aftershocks of the Civil War and the Coinage Act of 1873. During the early 1880s, the United States Mint was experimenting with different designs and metallic compositions in an effort to refine both the appearance and the functionality of American coinage. Pattern coins were never intended for general circulation. Instead, they were trial pieces created to test new ideas in design, weight composition, or technology. The 1882 half-dollar pattern stands as a rare and intriguing example of this experimental spirit. By 1882, the circulating half-dollar design was the seated Liberty type created by Christian Gobrecht decades earlier. That design had served the country since 1839 with several minor modifications. However, artistic tastes were evolving and there was growing interest in modernizing American coinage. The Mint in Philadelphia, which was the primary facility responsible for producing pattern coins, often worked closely with engravers and designers to explore alternatives. Among the leading figures of the time was chief engraver Charles E. Barber, who would later introduce the Barber coinage in 1892. Pattern coins from 1882 reflect the internal discussions and artistic experimentation happening behind closed doors at the Mint. The 1882 half-dollar pattern coins were struck in limited numbers. Some were made in standard silver composition, similar to regular half-dollars of the era, while others may have been struck in different metals, such as copper or aluminum, strictly for testing and presentation purposes. Pattern coins often carried distinctive features that separated them from circulation issues. These differences might include slight changes in Liberty's posture alterations to the lettering modifications to the eagle on the reverse or experimental edge designs. In certain cases, the date style or star placement differed subtly from the adopted design. The obverse of many 1882 half-dollar patterns retained the seated Liberty motif but incorporated refinements in detail. Liberty might appear with sharper drapery folds, more defined facial features, or adjusted proportions. Designers frequently experimented with relief levels to determine how well a coin would strike up under pressure and how quickly dies might wear out. High relief patterns often looked impressive, but proved impractical for large-scale production. These technical challenges were a major reason pattern coins were essential in the decision-making process. The reverse design of half-dollar patterns from this era typically featured the heraldic eagle holding arrows and an olive branch symbolizing both military strength and peace. However, pattern reverses sometimes tested variations in feather detail shield lines or the arrangement of inscriptions, such as United States of America and half-dollar. Subtle changes in lettering size or spacing were evaluated for clarity and durability. Mint officials paid close attention to how inscriptions appeared after repeated strikes, since legibility was critical for public trust in coinage. The context of 1882 is important. The United States was operating under the Bland-Allison Act of 1878, which required the Treasury to purchase large quantities of silver for coinage. Although the act mainly affected silver dollars, it influenced broader discussions about silver denominations, including the half-dollar. There were debates about silver supply market demand and the balance between gold and silver currency. Pattern coins often emerged during such transitional periods when policymakers were reconsidering the direction of monetary policy. Collectors today value the 1882 half-dollar pattern coin not only for its rarity, but also for its historical significance. Many pattern coins from the 19th century were sold to collectors, either officially or unofficially through mint connections. This practice was common especially during the tenure of mint officials who recognized collector interest. As a result, some examples survive in remarkable proof condition with mirror-like surfaces and sharp details. Others show minor handling marks, suggesting they were once part of private cabinets in the late 19th century. In numismatic catalogs, 1882 half-dollar patterns are identified by Judd numbers referencing the standard reference book United States Pattern Coins by J. Hewitt Judd. Each variation receives a separate listing based on differences in metal finish or design. For example, one variety might be struck in silver with a reeded edge, while another could exist in copper with a plain edge. These distinctions are crucial for collectors and researchers seeking to understand the full scope of mint experimentation during that year. The rarity of these pattern coins cannot be overstated. In many cases, fewer than a dozen examples of a specific variety are known to exist. Some varieties may survive in populations of fewer than 5 pieces. Because patterns were not made for circulation, their survival depended entirely on being preserved intentionally. Coins that were not distributed to collectors were often melted down, making surviving specimens extremely scarce. Auction records over the past decades show strong demand for 19th-century pattern coinage. The 1882 half-dollar pattern, when offered in high-grade proof condition, can command significant prices depending on its specific Judd designation and state of preservation. Collectors are particularly drawn to pieces with deep cameo, contrast, strong eye appeal, and documented provenance tracing back to famous collections. Beyond its market value, the 1882 half-dollar pattern coin provides insight into the artistic and technological evolution of American coinage. It represents a bridge between the long-running seated Liberty design and the upcoming Barber series that would debut a decade later. Studying these patterns reveals how engravers refined details, adjusted inscriptions, and tested practical strike qualities before finalizing a design for nationwide production. The Philadelphia Mint during this period operated with a blend of tradition and innovation. Skilled engravers hand-prepared dies using techniques that required extraordinary precision. Pattern coins allowed them to experiment without the financial risk of mass production errors. Every line on Liberty's gown, every feather on the eagle, and every serif in the lettering reflected deliberate craftsmanship. In the broader sweep of American history, the 1882 half-dollar pattern coin stands as a symbol of experimentation during the Gilded Age. The country was expanding industrially, railroads were connecting distant regions, and new technologies were reshaping daily life. Coinage design evolved alongside these, developments serving as miniature works of art that circulated national identity in metal form. Although the pattern half-dollar of 1882 never entered everyday commerce, it contributed to the creative dialogue that shaped future coinage. For modern viewers and collectors, holding or even seeing images of such a coin is like stepping into the workshop of the 19th century mint. It invites reflection on the careful balance between aesthetics, functionality, and economic policy. The 1882 half-dollar pattern coin may be rare, but its story is rich, offering a window into the ambitions and craftsmanship of American numismatic history. The deeper history of the 1882 United States half-dollar pattern coin cannot be understood without exploring the long evolution of the half-dollar denomination itself. The half-dollar had been a cornerstone of American commerce since the late 18th century. From the flowing hair type of 1794 to the draped bust-capped bust, and eventually the seated Liberty design, the denomination reflected the political, artistic, and economic priorities of each era. By 1882, the seated Liberty half-dollar had already been in production for more than 4 decades, yet the mint was quietly exploring alternatives through pattern coinage. The seated Liberty design, created by Christian Gobrecht in 1839, symbolized classical Republican ideals. Liberty was shown seated holding a shield and pole topped with a cap representing freedom. Over time, small modifications were made, including the addition of arrows at the date in certain years to denote weight changes and the motto, "In God We Trust," added to the reverse in 1866 after the Civil War. By the early 1880s, however many critics felt the design appeared dated compared to European coinage, which had become more dynamic and sculptural. During this period, the United States Mint was under increasing public and political scrutiny. The Coinage Act of 1873 had eliminated the standard silver dollar, temporarily creating controversy, later labeled by critics as the crime of 1873. The bland Allison Act of 1878 partially restored silver coinage by requiring government purchases of silver bullion. Although these debates centered largely on the silver dollar, they influenced broader thinking about silver denominations, including the half-dollar. Mint officials were sensitive to the need for coins that inspired public confidence and reflected national strength. Pattern coins of 1882 were part of a broader experimental culture at the Mint that had been active since the 1850s. These coins were produced in very small quantities sometimes, only a handful of pieces. They allowed engravers to test high-relief models, alternative portrait styles, revised inscriptions, and even entirely new motifs. In some cases, pattern coins were made in unusual metals, such as aluminum nickel or copper, simply to observe striking characteristics or to create presentation pieces for lawmakers and influential collectors. By 1882, Charles E. Barber was serving as chief engraver of the United States Mint. Barber had inherited a tradition shaped by earlier engravers such as Christian Gobrecht and James B. Longacre. Although Barber is best known for the Barber dime, quarter, and half-dollar introduced in 1892, his involvement in pattern experimentation during the 1880s was significant. The half-dollar patterns of 1882 demonstrate the Mint's gradual movement away from the aging seated liberty motif toward something more contemporary and technically efficient. One aspect of the 1882 half-dollar pattern coin that fascinates historians is the attention paid to relief depth. High-relief coins often display exceptional beauty because the devices rise prominently from the field, creating dramatic shadows. However, high relief also creates production challenges. Dies wear out more quickly, and coins may not stack properly. Through pattern testing, the Mint evaluated how much relief could be sustained without compromising large-scale manufacturing efficiency. This technical balancing act reveals how art and industry intersected within the coining process. In the end, the 1882 half-dollar pattern coin stands not as a circulating artifact, but as a creative milestone. It connects the long-running seated liberty series to the coming Barber era. It reflects the economic debates of the Silver Age. It showcases technological refinement and artistic exploration. Most importantly, it reminds us that even the coins, never meant for pockets and purses, played a vital role in shaping American monetary history.